Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's out-of-home office hours. I'm Scott Fiaschetti, and just again want to welcome everybody and just let everybody know just how personally excited I am about today's session. As I'm sure you're all aware of, today we have a special guest, a very special guest, Steve Nicklin, SVP of Marketing and Analytics at OAAA with us today. And again, I'm always happy to have this session. We've been doing it the last couple of years, and so I'm always excited to have Steve on with me to do a session for the industry. Steve and I do a lot together, in the background, helping both of our members out, communicating a lot throughout the year. And it's always nice to have one of these sessions where we can be together and present to the industry. So without further ado, I just want to say welcome, Steve. I'm super excited to have you here today. Had a chance to look at the deck ahead of time, obviously, and Steve's got some really great insights that he's going to talk to us about today on things like top product categories and out of home, kind of where the consumer confidence is right now, and what does next year start to look like with some projections. So definitely feel free to ask questions. There he is. Hey, Steve. Definitely feel free to ask questions as we go along. We'll actually kind of address those at the end, unless there's something that's really kind of burning question and pertinent right in that moment. Otherwise, we'll keep to the end. If you can, just try to be sure to put your questions in the Q&A widget versus the chat widget. Sometimes it gets hard to manage them, but we also do like to leave the chat open. So if there's something where you're not hearing us well or something like that, or not seeing anything well, you can quickly communicate to us there. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Steve and let him go from there, and I'll kind of jump back in the session.
Thanks, Scott.
Cool.
Well, welcome everybody. And Scott, really appreciate you giving OAAA the opportunity to participate today. We're going to review the current trends in the ad marketplace overall, and also the latest research trends with out of home and the latest consumer research we've done, and certainly consumer insights. In the last portion of my presentation today, I do want to review some of the key marketing resources that we offer our members to enhance their business efforts. And so if you're not already an OAAA member, I'll do a little bit of a sales pitch, and I hope that you'll join. So pre-pandemic, many of you probably know, Out of Home had compiled a really impressive 10-year growth cycle where every single quarter we were growing throughout that whole decade. And what was really remarkable about that was, at the same time, digital media was just eating the lunch of all of our traditional competitors. So that we were able to produce that decade of growth was really incredible. Of course, we all know the wobble that we experienced during the pandemic, but the really great news is, while many forecasters didn't think our industry would recover from that until 2025, we actually recovered from that the pandemic dip last year. And we did it in really impressive fashion. We slightly surpassed the previous record high in ad spend our industry had hit in 2019. Total media grew just over 7% in 2022, but out of home grew over 20%. And you can see in the lower middle part of the slide there, what was really driving our growth was, of course, digital out of home. And we'll get into the specifics of that later, but that's going to continue to be our biggest growth driver. The good news was we had growth across all four of our category formats: billboards, street furniture, transit, and place-based. You can see the formats that grew the fastest last year, transit and place-based, were also those that were hit the hardest during the pandemic. And so those continue to recover, but we're seeing strong growth again. We're hoping to grow those segments certainly back to their pre-pandemic highs also. Most of you know how locally centric out-of-home media is. About 2/3 of our spend comes out of the local advertising market, the other third from national spend. And if you look at these top 10 product categories in out-of-home in terms of our total ad spend generation, you can see they're very reflective of that local connection that we have. Hospitals, clinics, medical centers, traditionally has always been our #1 product category, and legal services is usually #2. But interestingly, so far this year, legal services has been outperforming hospitals and medical services for the first half of the year. And we'll see, probably later this month or early in December, we'll report on Q3 if that trend has continued. But taking a little bit of a deeper dive into the healthcare category, it's really a great analogy for how we do connect so well with local consumers. We see almost 60% in our research with the Harris poll, almost 60% of consumers have recently noticed an out-of-home ad for healthcare. But on the right side of the page, I think is really the even more impressive statistic, and that's that we're driving these incredibly high levels of engagement with people who are noticing those ads. Over 3/4 of those ad viewers engaged with the ad in some way, shape, or form. And you can see what the top action was there. And that's pretty consistent across the board with out-of-home and all the categories that we've studied, is that we're generating high levels of search with consumers. And that's one of out-of-home's most valuable value propositions in today's marketplace. I love this next slide because it really is a testimonial to how out-of-home works throughout the purchase funnel in today's marketplace. Historically, of course, out-of-home was thought to be really more of a brand awareness medium and not so effective lower in the funnel. But with all the data solution options that are now available in the ad marketplace, it's really clear that we can define and prove the value of out-of-home on those lower funnel KPIs. But here you see McDonald's, which last year was the #2 spender in out-of-home. And throughout the course of almost all of the last 30 years, they've been #1. But what are they using out-of-home for? Well, to drive consumers into their stores. And then on the flip side of that coin, Amazon and Google primarily using out-of-home to drive online activation. And then Apple, primarily online activation, but in some of the largest markets where they have their stores, of course, also trying to generate store traffic. So really a testimony to how out-of-home performs throughout the funnel. And these enormous brands are heavily invested in out-of-home. Apple spends actually close to 10% of their ad budget on out-of-home. Seems like we've been in this cycle for the last 3 years of kind of nonstop issues. COVID, inflation, and now, of course, terrible situation with wars in the world. But we have worked really closely with the Harris poll since the onset of the pandemic, and they do a weekly tracker to really keep their pulse on consumer sentiment. And you can see COVID at this point is somewhat like leveled out in terms of what level of concern that consumers have about it. But you can see at the very top of the page, what does remain the top concern for most consumers is the economy and inflation. So I wanted to point that out. It seems like we've been under this cloud of this pending inflation driven recession for, a year and a half, if not more, and it still has not materialized. Not that it's an easy economic environment by any stretch, but we still are not technically in any sort of recession. But I wanted to take a minute to talk about that. I think it seems like the latest economic reports, are showing that inflation is on a consistent downward trend. And the most recent projections from economists that I've been reading suggest that they're now thinking if there is one, it would be in 2024, probably the first half of the year, and it would only be A, mild, and 2, short-lived. So hopefully nothing too bad on the horizon, even if it does materialize. But I do want to talk about kind of what's produced that situation that we're in right now. And during the pandemic, there were two large congressional releases of relief dollars that were put into the US economy. And those totaled $2.5 trillion. And because many sectors of the economy were in essence either shut down or very curtailed in their operation, most people ended up saving most of that money because they couldn't spend it during the pandemic in a way that they would have if the economy wasn't somewhat shuttered. But once the economy reopened, that's what flooded all these additional dollars back into the marketplace. And that's what sparked and drove the inflation. So while there was inflation going on, because consumers had so much built up savings, they really weren't that concerned with the inflation. And so that spending glut just continued to fuel it higher. So hopefully we're back on a corrective trajectory at this point. But many economists actually think that excess savings bank that consumers built up during the pandemic actually was extinguished sometime late this summer. So that's why, even though it seems that the threat of a recession has decreased and the depth of a perceived recession has lessened, there's still this kind of worry, and that's because consumers don't have these built up savings that they did. But I read, I guess it was last week, there was a story citing the latest Conference Board's Consumer Confidence Index, and it reported the third straight monthly decline among consumers overall in terms of their confidence about the economy. But it was very uneven among key consumer segments. And what they found was the most optimistic consumers in terms of their view of the economy were younger and also had higher household incomes. And then those that were less optimistic, somewhat pessimistic about the state of the economy, were kind of the converse side of that. Those tend to be lower income households, and also older consumers. So spent a lot of time talking about this. And why? Well, because I wanted to key all that up to really share this really incredible research that was done actually based on the most recent recession that we had, which was the pandemic-induced recession. And this was from Analytic Partners, and again, very recent research. And what it found across the board was advertisers who remain committed to the marketplace, who continue to advertise and market, they outperform their competitors across the board. So I wanted to give you a little, fuel here if you needed something in your conversations with your clients and prospects, just to help reinforce the importance of remaining committed to the marketplace and to their target consumers. So let's talk about how we're looking for the end of the year here. We're into the 11th month of the year, coming up on 2024. We work really closely with Magna in terms of data sharing, and their projections, which came out at the end of September, showed that they were forecasting out of home would increase just over 4% this year and just over 5% next year. So far, year to date, and that was through the first half of the year, we were up just under 2%. So we'll see how Q3 comes in, and then of course how we perform in Q4. But a couple of things I'd really like to point out here. If you look to the left of the out-of-home box at the 2023 data, which is the lighter blue shading, you can see almost all of our traditional competitors were down. But if you go to the right side, the far right side of the slide, what you see is the total media trends for this year and next. So total media looks like they could end up just over 5% both this year and next. But if you look immediately to the right of the red dotted out-of-home box and you see search and social, you can see that's where the huge amount of growth is coming from both of those segments. And that's really key and important for us because out of home plays a super important value with both of those media in terms of driving amplification and making advertiser investments in the search and social channels work even better and harder when out of home is part of their media mix. And I'll get into some of the data that supports that as we go through the presentation. So we had an election this week, some really important voting that occurred, especially in states like Pennsylvania and Virginia and Ohio, and wanted to just tee up how even much bigger and more pervasive it'll be next year in 2024. There are ad spend projections that political will generate between 10 and $12 billion next year. And that really presents a two-pronged opportunity for out of home, not only in that political ad spend bucket itself, which we've had really amazing growth with, and I'll get into that in a few more slides, but also on the flip side of that coin, we still see the bulk of political dollars going into both TV and digital, and especially with TV and to a lesser degree radio. Political years really drive a lot of pressure on their inventory, especially local TV and local radio stations. And so what that does is that creates another opportunity for us outside of political advertising, because those competitors are having that additional inventory stress and also price stress. So some of their inventory becomes unaffordable for a lot of local advertisers. And then there's also just sometimes they're out of inventory. So that's just a really key opportunity for us. So when you think about these important political years, always think outside the box of the political piece because there's so much opportunity for us there. I wanted to just note this political primer that we offer our members. The political category is quite different from most of the product categories that we work in throughout the year. It tends to have a much longer lead cycle. Most of the agency work is specifically out of political shops or organizations. And so I just wanted to point out for those of you who maybe aren't OAAA members, this is the type of resource that we offer our membership. And just kind of a little bit more on what the projections are for next year. This is citing Ad Impact, which is a firm that tracks political ad spending. They think that the presidential election will generate about close to $3 billion in ad spend, about $2 billion on the US Senate races, almost $2 billion on US House races, over 350 million, actually over 360 million on gubernatorial elections, and then 3.3 billion on other races, referendum, ballot issues, etc. So those are a lot of numbers, a lot of really large numbers, but let's take a look at how this translates for out of home. And I want to help really underscore where I think the opportunities are here. So this is the last 10 years, how we've tracked with political ad spend. You can see our growth was pretty consistent from 2013, really up through 2019. And then it really took off in 2020 and grew again significantly in 2022. What you notice here is the presidential years always spike, and the midterm election years always spike. It's those the odd years where there is a dip, and that occurs with political spend across any channel. But you can see the trend for us definitely is upward there, with really huge jump, particularly last year. And this is how that spend has broken down by quarter throughout that 10-year cycle. You can see the vast majority of the spend happens in the third and fourth quarters. That's really where the opportunity exists in most instances. However, that doesn't mean you want to wait until then to get engaged with this category. The time to get engaged with this political category is actually now. And this really highlights, in the very best way I can convey it, what our true opportunity is in terms of the out-of-home space. You can see the biggest chunk of the pie here is state and local campaigns. And that's state house level. That's not US House or US Senate. Those races are captured at the top of the pie chart under national campaigns. So it would be things like the state and local campaigns, mayoral races, Virginia state house races, Virginia governor's races. Those types of races are what fall into that state and local campaign bucket. And again, this reflects our resonance on that local advertising marketplace. That's where the bulk of our opportunity is, and also with ballot issues. So I would say out of the gate, if you're going to put your focus and energy anywhere, it definitely needs to be in that piece. So I'm going to start clipping through some of these slides pretty quickly. We're really done with most of kind of the analysis I wanted to get into, but we are the world's oldest form of advertising, but we're one of the most highly effective in today's, ever-changing marketplace. And that's because we have an anchor right in the public square. Consumers don't have to turn us on to view us. We're pretty unmissable and we can't be skipped easily. And we've really come back again well from the pandemic. I'm sure Geopath has a lot of data to kind of supplement this same story. But we find that with our morning consult work, almost 80% of consumers are back to commuting, over half of those daily. And of course, this incorporates markets across the US. There are certainly a lot of mid-size and smaller markets that never did have the disruption to work commuting that some of the nation's largest cities did. So in many of your markets, these numbers are probably even considerably higher. We've seen really great rebound also on the transit side and also with air travel. Already some days this year in 2023, we've surpassed levels pre-pandemic from 2019. I think there's some expectation we might see that again for the upcoming year-end holidays. And then transit ridership so far in Q2 this year compared to Q2 a year ago was up almost 14%. So again, still building back to where we were before the pandemic on the transit side, but some really healthy increases going on. So certainly some encouraging trends there. And what this has done for us as an industry is really helped some of our pre-pandemic statistics and reach come back in really full-blown glory. Here we see almost 90% of consumers say that they've seen out-of-home ads in the last month. That's incredible reach. Really no other medium able to match that these days. And then just almost as impressively, 85% of those consumers report that they look at the ads at least part of the time. And because with out-of-home, the actual ad is the content, we're not trying to jam an ad in between somebody's viewing, listening, reading experience. Out-of-home ads on billboards are most favorably viewed form of advertising by consumers. They rank us higher in terms of their favorableness towards out-of-home billboards than any other form of advertising. And why that is because they find out-of-home ads useful most of the time. About 85% of viewers find out-of-home ads useful. That's a very high statistic. And you can see they're kind of driving what they have the most level of engagement with is ads that offer sort of special promotions and other sorts of offers. And I love this research because we surveyed consumers and asked them what sort of out-of-home ads resonate most with them. And they parroted back to us exactly what we use in trying to educate advertisers and agencies and brands about how to do out-of-home. Consumers respond to ads that are colorful and vibrant. They love wit and humor in advertising. They really like something that's simple in terms of its messaging and design so that it can be easily conveyed to them. So it's great to see consumers parroting back to us the same sort of intent around creative messaging that we know works best. And then I mentioned the importance of social and search earlier in terms of what's happening with ad spend. And here, this is a great testimony to out-of-home's resonance on social media platforms. About 2/3 of TikTok users report that they've seen out-of-home ads in their TikTok feeds, which is really incredible, because what that means is those out-of-home campaigns are way over delivering with all these additional earned impressions that the advertiser hasn't had to pay for, because they selected out-of-home in their media plan. So if you think about these these last few slides that I shared, out-of-home's massive reach, our very high consumer favorability, and our perceived usefulness by most consumers, all those help generate the data that we're seeing here from Solomon Partners. And their analysis showed that on average, out-of-home generates higher ad recall than any of our competitive media. So that's an important value proposition in the ad marketplace. But the other piece that's really critically important for us is our unrivaled reach connects with many consumers who are viewed as the most lucrative by many brands, and that's younger, more affluent audiences. And sometimes those younger audiences can be particularly tricky for brands and agencies to reach, but out-of-home does that in a really significant way. And in our increasingly diverse society, out-of-home over-indexes with the fastest growing demographic segments, and those are Asian, Black, and Hispanic Americans. And what we find in our research with those important multicultural groups is that they over-index in terms of their favorability towards out-of-home than the population in general. But they are even more likely to notice out-of-home ads when the ads reflect their cultural identity. So particularly if you're a brand or you're working with an agency who's focused on these important groups, really important to make sure that you're taking full advantage of this research to help guide that creative messaging and its creation. In addition to these three key multicultural groups over-indexing in their favorability to out-of-home, they're also more likely to notice directional out-of-home signage. And then by really significant amounts, they're also much more likely to actually visit a store or business once they've noticed those directional signs. So some really important points, again, when you're trying to reach these important consumer segments about how to craft that advertising message to match the KPI that you're looking for as a brand or agency. And then I know we're really just right in front of the big holiday promotion area and certain travel periods, but we released this data back in September. I wanted to touch on it quickly. We found some really positive, encouraging news for what was planned or intended vacation travel this year. More people planning to travel this year than last, planning to go longer distances this year than last, and also planning to be on vacation for more days than last. So really positive, encouraging news there. Similarly, found same type of encouraging news on the shopping front. More people planning to shop this year, considerable number of them planning to spend more in stores this year. And then you can see this month will be where they make the bulk of their purchases, but still a large, significant number of them are going to be making purchases in December. And you can see some of what will be the hottest product categories for this year. So as we saw in those 2022 year-end results that I shared earlier, digital out-of-home is really playing a key role for our industry. And if you kind of flip over the side of our competition on the digital side, they're really facing some hurdles beyond the privacy and technical restrictions that are being enforced on them by states like California or Apple with their iOS changes where consumers have to opt in. During the pandemic, most of us were more reliant on our digital devices than ever before. And what that did was it really generated high levels of annoyance with ads that interrupt consumer experiences. Almost 80% of consumers reporting that as a major annoyance. High number of them, over 70%, are concerned about their personal security and data when they're using online devices. And then almost 70% report that they frequently skip ads because they're just burnt out on digital devices that are filled with advertising. Whereas on our side of the equation, some really good positive news. Last year, as I shared earlier, digital out-of-home grew 24%. This year, projected to grow 14%. And its importance to our industry, again, is going to only continue to accelerate. In just a few years, it'll be close to half of our total spend. Pardon me. And really what's helping drive that is the immediacy and flexibility that this medium offers. And with that flexibility and immediacy, of course, what that offers the advertiser is the ability to continue to update that message to make it as relevant as possible for the intended target audience. And you see here, 70% of consumers say they've recently noticed digital billboard ads. About 2/3 of them recently took some sort of action after seeing the digital billboard ad, and over half of those actions were done on mobile devices. So again, when you think about those search and social buckets, they're generating so much spend. Again, more evidence about how out-of-home plays a critical role in helping make those investments work really well and really hard. And again, the dynamism of the digital out-of-home platform makes the advertising resonate with more consumers. 40% of US adults say that dynamic messaging, contextual, is of greater interest to them. And then you can see, especially with younger audiences, those in larger urban areas, those with higher levels of education, some of the multicultural audiences, that dynamic out-of-home is of even greater interest. So really important to consider this again when you're thinking about who your target audiences are. And then on the programmatic side, I just wanted to touch on that really quickly. The rapid rise of programmatic has certainly enhanced our overall growth by offering digital media planners another robust and efficient way to reach their target audiences. This year, programmatic digital out-of-home is forecast to jump by almost half and represent close to 1/4 of our total digital out-of-home spend. So out-of-home is highly effective in engaging consumers throughout their daily journey, and our resonance with consumers translates to producing results for our out-of-home clients, and this is how we do it. We deliver results in impressive fashion. Almost 4 in 5 recent out-of-home ad viewers took an action after exposure, with search being, again, the top action generated. And retail media is certainly one of the hottest topics in today's marketing economy, and out-of-home really plays a critical role there in terms of that retail shopping ecosystem. Almost 70% of consumers report that they notice out-of-home ads on their way to shop in physical stores. And you can see those numbers jump even higher among multicultural audiences. And beyond notice, over 40% of consumers report out-of-home ads influence their in-store purchasing decisions, with even greater impact among younger, more affluent, and multicultural audiences. And this is one of my favorite slides, and it's because of the ability of out-of-home to prime mobile engagement. And that our ability to do that really can't be overstated. Over 3/4 of consumers were recently prompted to take an action on their mobile device following out-of-home exposure. And next, I'd like to share a video that showcases out-of-home's impact across various elements I've just shared, and that being specifically online and mobile activation and retail marketing impact.
Gamers. They're competitive, they're coordinated, they're laser focused, except when it's an ad you want them to focus on. Streamers were teaming up with NFL stars for Twitch's 2nd annual Streamer Bowl in Fortnite, and Twitch wanted to bring gamers to the platform to watch. But the place where they were spending most of their time was also where they were poised and ready to ignore our ad and get right back to playing. So in a first ever move, we adopted the strategy of the best Fortnite players. We waited it out. Instead of the tried and true tactic of reaching them on platform, we waited for our gamers to emerge from their lair and found them in the real world with out-of-home units around their cities. We used data to find the exact gamers we wanted to lure them into their next game. We picked just the cities whose NFL stars were participating in the tournament. Then we overlaid GameStop shopper data, a favorite retailer of gamers who also loved the NFL, to make sure our gamers were qualified. Did this unprecedented strategy work? Compared to digital ads, gamers who saw our out-of-home ads were 23 times more likely to tune in to Streamer Bowl 2. Our out-of-home generated a 245% incremental lift in on-site viewers and a 90% incremental lift in time spent on the site. Proof that the strategy of Fortnite players can apply to media strategy too.
Love that campaign. Great results, of course. And here we go, parallel. Out-of-home over indexes, again, with those younger, more affluent and educated audiences. And these, of course, are the same consumers that are most engaged with social media. So the ease with which clever, timely, creative in the out-of-home space can be shared, it's no surprise that over 2/3 of Gen Z and millennials have seen out-of-home ads reposted in their social media feeds, and they also show a really high propensity to actually reshare out-of-home ads themselves. And tying back to out-of-home's natural ability to engage consumers when they're most likely to act or respond, these are the product categories that consumers say typically are most relevant to them in the out-of-home space. And no surprises here: retail, QSR, food and beverage, health service categories, etc. Let's take a little bit of a dive into a couple of those, starting with QSR. So we see here, somewhat similar to what we saw with healthcare, about 6 in 10 consumers recently have seen QSR ads in the out-of-home environment. But on the right side of the page, I think, is the really impressive information there. And you see that of those who viewed those out-of-home QSR ads recently, we engaged almost 9 in 10 of them. And the top action was in-store purchasing. That was with 67% of those engagements. And again, think back to who traditionally is the #1 spender in out-of-home, McDonald's. So proof. And then on the automotive side, which this category really had a tough go during the pandemic, but it's been one of the stronger categories in 2023. And of course, it's always an important segment for us in out-of-home. Our research with Harris Poll tells a compelling story for why automotive brands and dealers should be incorporating out-of-home in their media mix. We see here in the nation's largest cities and among men and younger generations, out-of-home ads generate attention with it by about half of those key audience segments. And then very importantly, out-of-home auto ad notice leads to consumer activation, with more than 4 in 10 viewers and almost 40% of those viewers visiting the actual brand or dealer website or doing other online research as a result of that ad exposure. So again, that search and online activation really can't be overstated. We've partnered with the Harris Poll to study the out-of-home impact among key categories. And what we look at when we study each one of these is we look at what rates do they notice out-of-home, at what levels does that notice drive engagement, and then we survey the consumers and ask them what type of ad messages for these specific categories are most resonant with them. And this is a list of the 15 product categories that we've surveyed so far. These were all available on the OAAA website to our members, and we'll be surveying probably at least another half dozen next year and adding to this library. I'm going to get into some of our resources here in just a couple slides, but I wanted to make sure that everybody's aware that we did produce best practices for modeling out-of-home in the marketing mix modeling and attribution space. We released those, about 2 years ago now. But that's really in response to the fact that out-of-home's value can be proven on so many levels because there are so many data solutions out there, and technology has certainly been our great friend in helping us to showcase those results. So we do have those best practices available. And then I thought it was interesting. This was a survey that Burrell, who they're experts in the local ad space, they released this data earlier this summer, but they were asking local agencies in terms of their focus for 2023, which media channel had their most attention or was generating the highest levels of interest with them. And 43% of those agencies said out of home. So that's pretty cool. Before I get into the OAAA resources, I just want to briefly talk about, this is a study that we'll be releasing in the coming months. It's with Bench Marketing. We did a landmark study with them about 6 years ago. And same approach here, where they are an independent data analytics group. They're a part of the Omnicom agency family, and they're looking at out-of-home media effectiveness and the effectiveness of other channels in this analysis. But basically, they looked at 3 product categories: automotive, CPG, food, and retail grocery. And they looked at the budget size of the advertiser and classified those as small, medium, and large. And then they looked at 4 KPIs: sales, awareness, consideration, and purchase intent. And what they did was they developed these models and then ran response curves and looked at optimal media investment for each of the ad channels included to determine what generated the overall best media mix. And what they found across the board in our previous research, and I'm going to let the cat out of the bag here a little bit again, but it's what they're also finding in this current research is out-of-home gets underallocated across the board in terms of what would generate the greatest overall media mix performance. And so we're really looking forward to releasing that soon. That's coming. I just wanted to make you aware of that. That is in the funnel and will be coming out. I'm going to close out real quickly with just a highlight of some of the resources we do offer our members, and then we'll get into some questions. We do have a facts and figures section where you can look at where out-of-home currently stands in the marketplace and how we've trended in the recent past. Things such as total out-of-home revenue by category, our overall ad market share. And then we also produce an annual mega brands report, which details the top 100 out-of-home advertisers and also the top 100 overall spenders. And that report includes information on all the agencies that work with all those brands. We also offer an in-depth library of recent marketing research studies. You saw a lot of those highlights today. They provide a wide variety of proof points on the value of out-of-home and the really important role that we play in today's ever-changing media environment. We also have the ability to run customized research reports. We can help you analyze competitive ad spend in your markets or across the US. We have some demographic analysis reports available and also DMA profiles and maps that are produced by Claritas. This is how some of those ad spend reports can be utilized to help you develop your sales plans and initiatives throughout the year. This is actually an ad spend report that's broken down by industry, product category, and by month. And this is a report that I pulled from 2021. You can see here that what's circled in red is towards the bottom of the page is in January, the automotive category spent 10% of its annual media budget that month. And if you look to the right across the page, you'll see the other months, it was in the 8 to 7% range. So it can help you identify months where there tends to be heavier levels of investment to help you plan, what you want to execute for the year and when. Our OAAA case study library offers over 200 examples of out-of-home effectiveness from advertisers across a broad range of categories. And these case studies highlight what the advertiser's objectives, strategy, and results are. And of course, we all know the power of a testimonial. So these can be really impactful in terms of helping you drive sales. We also have a whole section on guidelines and standards. And it's really good framework to think about these in terms of reference manuals, sample documents such as contracts, RFI templates, and also guides like our out-of-home media planning guide. And then we developed this sales training module a few years ago, actually in conjunction with Geopath. And there are 9 modules, as you can see listed here. These are great tools, not only as you onboard new employees, but also they're great refreshers for industry veterans. There's a little bit of some of the content in there. This is the crafting client proposals, and you can see it outlines a typical media planning process, and then also offers some context for the brief in terms of what some really important questions are to consider working on with your clients. And then I like to say we have this really trio of incredible resources to help generate the very best out-of-home creative that we can put out there in the environment. There are studies that show that the creative can drive up to 70% of advertising ROI. So can't really stress enough the importance of getting a great creative message out there in the consumer environment. But we have our mock-up generator, which I'll get into here in a second. We also have a creative library, which highlights many of the past year's OB award winners. And then we have a creative best practices guide, which was put together by members of our creative committee, which is made up of some of the best creative minds in our industry. And that has really great, helpful information in terms of how to execute on creating the most effective out-of-home message. This is our mock-up generator, and this is a tool that's actually free for anyone to use. You don't have to be an OAAA member. So this can be used by clients and agencies, or if you want to just use it yourself and be the go-between with your clients, you can do that. But as we all know, the more impactful and effective the creative, the more likely it's going to produce results for the advertiser. And of course, that leads to continued investment in the out-of-home environment. But this is an example of how it works. You can take spec out-of-home creative, you can drop it into any of the formats listed on the left-hand side of the page. And where applicable, there's different environmental views available. For instance, there's not a bus shelter option in the rural environment. But anyway, once you drop the creative into the tool, you can use the zoom feature on the bottom, and it helps the user start to visualize how the consumer is actually going to be interacting with the ad message. So maybe your copy is sufficiently large, maybe your copy is too small, maybe your logo isn't large enough. Those are the types of things that can really help you figure out. And then we do have some really helpful directories on our website. We have our OAAA member directory, which lists every single one of our members. And you can search by different segments, including out-of-home media category, suppliers, manufacturers, etc. If you're seeking a technology solution, we have a tech locator that includes many providers in our space. And then our media locator, which is really more oriented towards agencies and brands. And it helps determine by CBSA or DMA market level which of our member companies operate in those markets and what specific formats that they deliver in terms of out-of-home inventory. Before I flip it back to Scott to entertain questions, I just wanted to share my email address in case you have any questions or feedback that we don't get to. If you're interested in OAAA membership, please also reach out to me and I'll put you in touch with our membership folks. But I'm going to turn it back to Scott.
All right. Well, thank you, Steve. Really, again, I like I said earlier, I always enjoy this session that we do each year because it's nice to see all the stats and the insights that you all are collecting for the industry. As Steve said, and I said earlier, drop any questions in the Q&A. Just as we're waiting, we do have a few minutes left, and just as we're waiting for other questions to come in, I do have one or two that I'd like to ask you, things that kind of jumped out at me as we were going through it. Like early on, you have that top 10 kind of categories, and I think that's always really interesting. And some of the stuff kind of we see from some of the analysis we do. But are there any like categories that are maybe our emerging categories, or anybody that's moving up on that top 10 list or down that you're seeing that you could share? I always think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this during the presentation, but legal services has really come on strong this year.
Mhm.
And so it actually, through the first half of this year, has displaced that hospital category as in medical services as number one. Cannabis continues to be a really strong category for us, certainly. And then I do really want to underscore again that whole political opportunity, that both in terms of what it offers us in that category, but also outside that category with the inventory pressures and stress it creates for a lot of our competitors. That really opens the door for us to like steal some share in this coming year.
Right. Yeah, and this next thing, I don't know that this is necessarily a question more than an observation, but I just found it was slide 9, that one about the impact of marketing increase, maintaining marketing spend, increasing spend during tough economic times. I think that's something we talk about all the time, but it's nice to see statistics to support that. I know it's something that kind of I see written in articles, and I kind of advocate for as well whenever I can to our members. It's just like, when you pull back, it almost has a reverse, a double negative impact, right? So
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. And I know when the pandemic first started and everyone was being told, don't go out of home, stay in home. We were like, whoa. And, searching madly for any sort of support that we could find. And there's been over time with every economic wobble that has occurred either here in our country or across the globe. There's a lot of great research that supports that same theory, that those who remain invested outperform those that pull back in terms of their marketing budgets. But what I loved about that from Analytic Partners was that was done on the pandemic. And, when the pandemic first hit, the most recent thing was from the 2008 recession. So it wasn't very timely or updated. And it does seem like, we are living in a whole new world where a lot of the old rules don't really apply. But that analysis, I think, is super valuable because it was based on the pandemic. So it's super relevant to today.
Right, cool. And a couple of questions did come in that I'll kind of put up here. So the Twitch case study, awesome. And this person's wondering, is that available online anywhere?
Yeah, we have it. We do have it available on our website. If you go to the marketing research tab under the out-of-home resources, you can download the presentation there. And then I would imagine you could search online and find it too, but it's definitely available on our website.
Okay, cool. And then one more, I'm not sure if we have enough insight on this one, but I'll pose it. Maybe we can. If not, we can follow up afterward. Do you know the percentage of agencies that now have an out-of-home department? I feel like that's an interesting trend that's kind of shifting back and forth these days, where it's like there was this separation and now there's this bringing together. I feel like that's what we're seeing.
Yeah, that's I don't have specific statistics on that, but what I am aware of, it seems that at least from the information I've been exposed to, seems that there is now more of this trend of absorbing what used to be kind of specialist or out-of-home groups back into mainstream agencies. And I think probably in a lot of ways, that might be better for our industry, especially within that agency family constructure, because I think it just makes it easier for out-of-home to become part of the equation, like sooner rather than later.
Yeah, for sure. And gives out-of-home a seat at the table, like you say, at that moment in time when plans are being crafted and constructed. I did have one more thought on one of the slides. That I really like that one, your slide about the holiday messaging,
Yes.
and it was on the bottom right side about the ad messaging most relevant. I know you didn't get to
Yep.
talk about it too much, but I thought it was interesting and I wonder if it reflects kind of what you're seeing in the consumer sentiment, right? The top communication was, wasn't it something around the effectiveness of value, or kind of, it spoke to me of like cost concerns, whereas with the top consumer, yeah, value or savings, and that to
Yeah,
me kind of really
I'm glad that you're bringing that
positive.
up. Yeah, because I think that, again, we've all been living under this cloud of this pending recession. So I think everyone's kind of defaulted to, at least emotionally, thinking, well, it's going to happen at some point, right? But it hasn't happened yet. And again, the latest forecasts are that if it does happen, it's probably going to be mild and pretty short in duration. But to your point, Scott, you see this really high focus on value and savings. And I think that really, to me, at least in my analysis, relates back to what I was sharing about during the pandemic, when the government flooded the marketplace with all the stimulus, but people couldn't spend it because so much of the economy was shuttered. And then they've now spent through all of that. The projections were, again, as of this, the end of this year's summer. So, savings are at this point, all that was built up during the pandemic is in theory depleted. So while the economic outlook seems to be, at least from a kind of theoretical point of view, better than probably what it's been for a year and a half, you see that, consumers, and this is higher than last year. You can see 75% of consumers, when we surveyed this last year, said that. But I think, again, that's all related to that depletion of savings.
Right. And that's, I mean, I've been seeing the same thing you're saying too. Like people have kind of burned through that little savings pot that they had. And now they're in this situation where, that is more of a concern. It's more top of mind for them because, they were able to save money during the pandemic. They weren't going out as much, and there was much to spend money on. And then there was the stimulus. And so now kind of worked through all that. There is, just with the last minute left, there was one more question. Well, there's two questions. One of them that I think you and I both should reach out afterwards. It's about kind of recommendations around programmatic tech stacks and things like that. That might be kind of a bigger question that we can answer kind of more easily, maybe in emails. But then there's another question about that slide you just had up, just where the source, the data.
Yeah, that came from the Harris poll. Yeah, so the holiday shopping and travel, that all came from Harris poll. And just real quickly on that, the question about the programmatic tech stack. Again, we have that tech located on our website, and that's a great tool to help interested parties investigate different suppliers and providers. But we as a trade association don't make recommendations, one member over the other. So that's the purpose of that tool, to help you evaluate different resources that are available and potential partners.
And I see the end of that question says we're planning on reaching out to Geopath next week. Definitely do that. We're here to try to answer any questions you might have. So just want to say thank you, Steve. I know we're at the top of the hour. Like I said a couple of times, I always appreciate, I enjoy working with you and doing these kinds of sessions and all the other stuff we do throughout the year. So, but thank
Absolutely,
you.
Scott. Really, the pleasure is mine. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone again for joining, and close out the year strong.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Cheers.